We are entering into the season on the Christian calendar that is called Advent. And this season is marked by four biblical themes: hope and peace and joy and love. And over the next few weeks, we're going to take these on one by one. And today, obviously, we'll take on the first of those, and that is hope. And as we as we kind of journey through Advent, or talk about hope this morning, it's my desire to push past any surface level view of hope that would require us to kind of sweep away the difficult things of life under the rug, right? Like, I think often when we think of hope, it's kind of this mere naive optimism that it's just, things will work out in the end. You just kind of dismiss all the bad things going on. I have to push past any kind of sense that to have hope in this world, we have to kind of sweep the negative under the rug, because I think that the Christian worldview, and particularly the role of Christmas in the Christian worldview, gives us, me and you, a unique capacity to hope amidst the rubble, to hope when our lives feel like they are in shambles. Now, before we jump in, I do want to note something about Advent, and that is this. In no way do I think me and you are required to participate in Advent as a church. However, I also do not think that there's anything that prohibits me and you from participating in Advent as a church, okay? I don't think Advent is something that's biblically declared, but nor do I think Advent is something that is biblically prohibited. And in fact, I personally think Advent can be a helpful practice for us as God's people, because Advent is going to help. I think if we really engage in this season, it helps us inhabit the world in a unique and holy way, a way that is different from the rest of the world. You've heard me use the great Tim Keller phrase, we're meant to live counterculture for the common good. Well, how do we live counterculture, different from the world around us? Not just culturally, but I often use the phrase Christianity is counterintuitive. It doesn't even make sense to the world. It's not just that it's different, it's that it's nonsensical. Well, Advent is one of the practices. It's not the only, but I think it's one of the practices we have, one of the tools we have to help us live in a way and inhabit the world in a way that's unique and holy and set apart from the world, so that we might be, Advent theme, light amidst darkness. Right? You see, the word Advent simply means arrival. Okay, so whenever you hear that word Advent, it simply is just the Latin for the word arrival or coming. And in this season, what me and you are invited to do is that we are invited to inhabit attention. Attention where we celebrate the first coming of Christ, the first arrival of Christ, his birth, while simultaneously anticipating his second coming, simultaneously longing for all things to be set right once and for all under the rule and reign of God. Advent helps me and you recognize that, yes, God has broken into the middle of history. However, all is not yet right in the world. That God is still doing something, and that there is more to come, that our current reality is not necessarily our destiny, that there is something more ultimate out there. And so with that in mind, we are going to let the book of Revelation guide us through these four themes of Advent: hope and peace and joy and love, over the next 4 weeks. This past summer, we did a very intensive study on the book of Revelation. We brought in a New Testament scholar, Dr. Garrett Best from York University, and in no way am I going to try to replicate what he did. This is not a study of the book of Revelation. You'll very clearly see here, this is studies in the book of Revelation. It's not comprehensive, right? But I do want us to draw from some of the themes and imagery of the book of Revelation to help us understand what it means for us to inhabit the time in between Christ's first and second arrival. All right? I remember when Garrett was here, and I remember having kind of a side conversation with him about the book of Revelation. I'm trying to wrap my head around it like you, trying to understand, like, how are you meant to read this book with all this weird imagery, right? And I remember him asking me this rhetorical question. He said, how do you communicate with clarity in an illiterate society that has nothing written down? And unlike me, Garrett is not very inviting, and he asked that question rhetorically. When I ask a question, right, you're allowed to talk in church. You can respond to me. Garrett, but rather asked the question and then answered it, which was probably wise because I would have gotten it wrong. But this is what he said, right? How do you communicate with clarity in an illiterate society where nothing's written down? And he said this: piercing, unforgettable images. Or in other words, propaganda. That's how you communicate in their world. They lived in a world of images, and that's what the book of Revelation traffics in. It traffics in images, and particularly contrasting images. That's what John is doing. He uses these sharp, contrasting images to make points that linger with us and stick with us. Images that me and you, think about some of the wild imagery from the book of Revelation. Because it's so wild and so sharp, it's unforgettable. And one of the main contrasts that runs all the way throughout the book of Revelation is this contrast between Babylon and the holy city, the New Jerusalem. Now, the holy city typifies God's good plans and purposes for his creation. What we see at the end of the book of Revelation, Revelation 22, the Garden of Eden restored, the tree of life and the river of life in the middle of the great city, the New Jerusalem, the holy city, right? So while the holy city typifies, right, God's good plans and purposes for his creation, the Garden of Eden restored, what God has always wanted, right, human flourishing on a curse-free earth as those who bear his image, right? Like that's what God intended. So that's what the holy city typifies. That's what it represents. And while the holy city represents that, Babylon serves as an archetype rather for the reign of sin and death and the curse. While the holy city represents everything that God intended, Babylon represents all the kingdoms of this world that seek to thwart what God has intended, his good plans and purposes for his creation during this present evil age. Babylon, in other words, represents everything that seeks to thwart our flourishing on God's originally good earth. And if you know your Old Testament well, you know that that's a pretty good image to use, right? Babylon is something that lived deep in the psyche of first century Jews because they knew their Old Testament, right? This is an image that would have stuck and lingered with John's original audience in these powerful ways. We first see Babylon in the Bible, actually in Genesis chapter 11, right? The Tower of? Yeah, right? So that's actually Babylon, okay? It's kind of a precursor to the Babylonian Empire that we'll reckon with later in the Old Testament. But think about the way the first 11 chapters of the Bible work, okay? So in the beginning, you get God creating this earth, and then he creates humans. And our commission is this: be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it, right? Like that's our commission on this earth. But then when we get to the Tower of Babel, 11 chapters later, they say this. This is what humanity says to each other. Come, let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens, so that we may make a name for ourselves. So we were meant to spread over the face of the earth, to spread God's glory over the face of the earth, over his creation as those who bear his image, right? But they're saying, let's rather instead come together so that we may make a name instead of for God, for ourselves. Otherwise, what? We might be scattered over the face of the earth, what God always intended for me and you, right? So like literally, you see the Babylon from the very outset of creation, from the very outset of the Bible, is a representation for everything that seeks to work against God's plans for mine and your flourishing on his good creation. Now, later on in the Bible, Babylon, and this is what we're more familiar with, arises as one of the greatest empires in the ancient Near Eastern world under the reign of King Nebuchadnezzar. Good job. And in 586 BC, which is this very famous year, so this is about 600 years before Jesus' ministry, Babylon sets their eyes on Israel and they sack the city of Jerusalem. They tore down the city's walls. By the way, you can find all this Josephus, if you're familiar with the first century historian Josephus. He has this famous work called the Antiquities, and he writes down all of Jewish history, and this is one of his main themes. It's 586 BC. bad year, worst year ever. And you can read all these details here, but it's in his writings, he says that Babylon comes into Jerusalem and they tear down the city's walls. They seize the temple treasures. They burn the temple and the royal palace. They slaughtered men and women and children. And they deported the remaining leaders and priests and soldiers and artisans to Babylon as slaves. There's an Old Testament scholar named Walter Brueggemann, probably one of the most formidable Old Testament scholars of our day. And this is the way he describes it. He says, the city was dismantled, the temple was burned, and the king was exiled. And I love this, every symbol of order and meaning was taken away. Every symbol of order and meaning was taken away. Elsewhere, he says that the sacking of Jerusalem was the most devastating and defining public event of the entire Old Testament. Why would John use this as an image? Because it was the lasting imagery of the failure of the people of God, of the oppression of the people of God. Another Old Testament scholar, Christopher J.H. Wright, I think sums it up perfectly. He says this, what happened in 586 BC was not merely the loss of a city, but the collapse of a whole worldview. It felt like the end of the world. All right, so in other words, what happened in this moment when Babylon comes into Jerusalem and sacks the city, destroys the temple and the palace, slaughters men, women, and children, and then takes all the leaders into Babylon, into captivity, Babylonian captivity, right? What happened in 586 BC, it's like the end of the world. Now, I've talked about this before, but it is actually amidst this destruction that we get the book that we call Lamentations. Now, this idea of lament, this is actually another Latin word here. Lamentation, it actually comes from the Latin word lamentio. And does anyone know what that means? It means wailing. The book of Lamentations, the most direct English translation would just be wailing. We're reading the book of wailing. And Lamentation, this book is actually comprised of 5 different poems of wailing. And it's written by, most scholars believe, a survivor of the events of 586 BC. This book is harsh, it is honest, it is stark, and it is sad. However, at the literal center of this book, and very much the literary center of this collection of wails, we get, in my opinion, some of the most beautiful words in all of Scripture. Me and you, we know them as the lyrics to the song, "The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. Remember my affliction and my bitterness, and the wormwood and the gall. My soul continually thinks of it and is bowed down within me." There's a recognition of the tragedy, right? What has happened is not good. 586 BC, the worst event in human history for these people. It was as if it was the end of the world. But this I call to mind, and therefore I have hope. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. The Lord is my portion, says my soul. And therefore, in light of all that, in light of the faithfulness of God, amidst the rubble of my life, I will hope in him. This is the kind of hope that Israel had held on to as they traded oppressor for generation after generation and century after century. This is the kind of hope that Jesus' birth brought amidst the tyranny of King Herod. And this is the kind of hope into which the book of Revelation is inviting its original audience, but also me and you. Hope amidst the rubble. Hope amidst the shambles of life. The kind of hope that doesn't sweep tragedy under the rug, it names it, but rather longs for something better amidst the rubble of this life. Revelation comes from the Greek word apocalypse, right? That's why we call it the book of Revelation. It simply means apocalypse, and we've done this before, but what does apocalypse mean? Unveiling, right? Doesn't mean the end of the world. It just simply means to unveil the true nature of reality, ultimate reality. And the original audience of Revelation They were Christians, most scholars believe, that were living under the oppressive regime of the Roman Emperor Domitian. And their lives were defined by really three things: social relegation, economic marginalization, and the constant threat of physical persecution. And John does nothing in John's revelation, nothing in his unveiling says, hey, just sweep all that under the rug, it doesn't matter, it's not real. Nothing in John's revelation is saying, hey, this doesn't really matter, don't worry about it, just be hunky-dory, and that's what it means to have hope as a Christian, right? He doesn't sweep reality under the rug. What does John do? He names the suffering for what it is. He calls it Babylon. He links their experience under the reign, the tyrannical reign of the Roman Emperor Domitian. He links it to the Jewish experience of 586 BC. And in so doing, what he's saying is your experience of suffering in this world, it is nothing new. This is the way of the world under the reign of sin and death and the curse. This is the way of the world during this present evil age. It's Babylon. To live, for me and you, to live before the second coming of Christ is to live in Babylon. That's John's point. All of the things that make us wail in this life, which there's plenty to make us wail in this life, amen? There are plenty of things to mourn in this life, amen? And it's all, for John, Babylon. The forces of evil that seek to thwart God's originally good purposes and plans for his good creation. And God's all that he made, and it was very good. But there's something that's thwarting that, and all of the things that seek to thwart it, John is saying it's all Babylon. However, John also reveals, apocalypse, unveils, that though this is theirs in our current reality, it is not our ultimate reality, right? God reveals for his people amidst their suffering that in the end, God will always get what God wanted. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no longer any sea, there was no more chaos. And I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem. Your current reality may be Babylon, but what is your destiny? It is the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride, beautifully dressed for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, look, God's dwelling place is now amongst the people, and he will dwell with them, and they will be his people, and God himself will be with them, and he will be their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, for they have been living in Babylon. But there will be no more death, or mourning, or crying, or pain. Why? For the old order of things, Babylon, it has passed away. By the way, that is what was being read for us in Revelation 18 in our scripture reading. The passing away of Babylon, and that's what we'll actually look at next week in more depth. And then John says this, he who is seated on the throne says this, I am making all things, everything new. Then he said, write this down. Why? Why? For these words, they are trustworthy and true. And that's not just written so that it rhyme in English. That's written so that we know that there is I think the writer of Hebrews, right, hope, it's an anchor for the soul. These are trustworthy. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They're new every morning. Great is your what? Great is your faithful. God's faithful to his word. These words are trustworthy and true. Do you see the point here? Therefore, I will hope in him. That's the source of our hope right there. Hope amidst the rubble. Now, as most of you know, just fair warning, I'm tired, and I'm going to talk about my dad's death, which means I'm going to cry. Okay? We're just going to go and admit that here. As most of you know, my dad died in 2013, and the 12th anniversary is coming up this Friday, December 5th. Early on, after my dad died, my sister and my mom and I, we'd all usually post something on Facebook, because that's what you do, to honor my dad on the anniversary of my death. And I think I've told some of you this. I'm by far the least intelligent person in my family. And that's not false humility. That's just the kind of family I come from, okay? And no one has a way with words like my sister. And my sister, she's my middle sister. She's the one with the that one on the far left, or if you're looking at it, far right, next to my dad. This is the last family picture we ever took, actually on Thanksgiving Day. We walked around the beautiful campus of Auburn University, which you can't make fun of me for since I'm talking about this. And I'll make the jabs when I can. And she was the ultimate daddy's girl. Funeral, maybe if y'all remember my friend whose mom was murdered, and at the funeral his sister talked about she was my person. And that's the relationship my sister had with my dad. This is the best way I know to put it. My dad, my mom was a very clean person like me, and so she wanted us to clean our rooms, okay? My sister, very difficult to live with because she is the most slovenly person. Brilliant, but slovenly, okay? And my dad, before my mom would come up to inspect her room, he would go up and he'd clean her room for her. That's the kind of relationship they had. He was her world. And when he died, think about the quote, it was as if her world ended. And so on the third anniversary of his death, she wrote this, and fair warning, it is long. I have a new Christmas time tradition. Every year, on December 5th, I cozy up in my favorite red sweater, sip a chai latte, and I watch my dad's funeral. Dad died at Christmas time, 3 years ago today, December 5th, 2013. The grief itself was bad enough, but the contrasting Christmas cheer made it much worse. As everyone else ate Santa-shaped cookies and shopped for presents, my family and I ate sympathy casserole, not me, and shopped. It was a joke, you were supposed to catch that. And shopped for cemetery plots. During the most wonderful time of the year, we endured the most awful time of our lives. 3 years later, I still affiliate Christmas with Dad's death. Christmas carols sound mournful to me. Poinsettias remind me of the ones at his funeral. Mangers and nativity scenes strike me as oddly casket-like. In a weird, jarring way, though, I find it beautiful. I find it beautiful that the darkest depths of my grief coincide with the celebration of the only light in the world that can brighten them. That mourning and lonely exile here can collide with rejoicing, for Emmanuel has come. That hopelessness of human death collides with the hopefulness of divine birth, and hope wins out. Hope is not typically touted at Christmas. Love and peace and joy. Sure, God so loved, peace on earth, tidings of joy, but hope, we don't hope in merry times, or at least I didn't. But as I look back on the past 3 years without my dad, I see that hope has been a stabilizing force in my life, a thematic constant. For 1,096 days, I've needed hope, and it's been there, and I've used it in the best of times, and in the worst of times, and in all the times in between. In the best of times, I hope. Before Dad died, good times, Christmases, weddings, game nights, Sunday mornings, they carried with them a shiny gloss, a sense that all's right in the world. It seemed then like there was nothing left to hope for. But since Dad died, good times carry with them a different sense, a sense that despite the surrounding goodness, something's still quite not right. Good times can't seem like the best of times without Dad. And so even in the best possible of times, I hope. I hope for a day when actually all is made right and new. I hope for the best, which is yet to come. In the worst of times, I hope. I take comfort in the fact that it is not always going to be this way. Yes, it is bad now, but just for now. Yes, I mourn and I fail and I suffer, but that's okay because there's a kingdom coming and a second kingdom coming. And so in the worst of times, I hope. I hope for a day when bads are bettered, wrongs are righted. I hope for kingdom to come. And in all the times in between, I hope. 3 years ago yesterday, I talked to my dad about football and pumpkin pie recipes. 3 years ago today, tomorrow, I picked out his casket. I live in a world where that can happen. I live in a world where Today can turn yesterday's ordinary and just fine into tomorrow's extraordinary, and it can't get any worse. The world, it's unpredictable. And because the knowns of yesterday are the unknowns of tomorrow, I am anxious today and in every day. And so in all the times in between, I hope. I hope for a day when I sing "It Is Well With My Soul" and actually mean those words. I hope for peace to come. Hope. It is why I returned to the church after I left her in college. I was hurt by her, weary and disheartened, and riddled with doubts. The problem of evil, anyone? I needed distance to heal and to think. But then Dad died, and only the church offered me what I wanted most: hope of reunion. And I took it. I committed to healing and thinking with the church alongside her, and it's because of hope. Hope is why I avoid euphemisms about death. I say Dad died, not Dad passed. I refer to Dad's funeral, not his life celebrations. Words matter, and I try to be careful with mine, and I don't want to use them to make death seem any more palatable. For it is the sharpness of death's sting that motivates us to hope. So why do we always seem to dull it? Hope is why I am overjoyed that Ben got married. On October 15th, Mary Beth made us a family of 5 again. And when she did, hope for kingdom here, kingdom come, kingdom here and now was realized in a small part. Something was made right here. Something was made right now to how it should be. And there is no greater joy in the world than that. So this morning, how do me and you tap into that kind of hope? How do me and you tap into the kind of hope that the author of the book of Lamentations had, that amidst the shambles and rubble of his life and the world as they knew it, wrote the words to the steadfast love of the Lord never ceases? How do me and you tap into the kind of hope that my sister displays here? Well, I think the answer is quite simple, and it's Advent. That's why we're doing this. Not because the Bible commands it, and it certainly doesn't prohibit it, but rather we do Advent because it helps us hope. It helps us recognize that we live in between the tension of the first and second coming, the first and second arrival, the first and second advent of Christ, the Messiah. It helps us recognize that our current reality is not our destiny, and that Christ has already come, and so it's not naive to believe so. For his words are trustworthy and they are true. Amen? We don't have some naive optimism as Christians. We have a hope that is anchored and rooted in factual history, that is rooted in reality. For if Christ has come, it means that he can come again. Light really will pierce the darkness of this world, for it already has. Babylon really will be defeated. All the things that seek to thwart our flourishing on God's good creation, all of it will be defeated. Why? Because on the cross, what did Christ say? It is finished. And death really will, one day it'll be overturned. Yes, we get glimmers of it now with the birth of a baby. That's why I love my daughter's name Naomi, because it represents, right, the birth of a baby, proving that death does not win out, but rather life does. And one day death really will be defeated because it already has. This morning, if you long for that hope and you haven't tapped into it yet by immersing yourself in the death and burial and resurrection of Jesus Christ, his incarnation as well, or if you want to realign yourself with that great hope amidst the rubble and the shambles of your life, our elders will be in the back. They always are. That's not a false invitation. That's a tangible invitation. They're always in the back, ready to pray with you. And also the church as a whole is ready to receive you if you want to come forward now as we stand and as we sing.